Jacksonville. The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
This is the week that was on the 9th of June 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. A very unusual week coming up here. There's a G6 conference going on in Toronto, Canada. DJ Trump will arrive there, and the participants from the EU will be, as one would say, forged against him because of the predatory trade practices he has implemented, tariffs on various things, steel and aluminum, aluminium, however you want to call it. Those things have upset the apple cart. And is the trade war on yet? Well, it's not exactly on yet. We'll know at the end of the conference, but DJ Trump will not be there. He will be on his way to Singapore. And the summit with Field Marshal of the Democratic Republic of Korea. What does this mean? DJ Trump will have all the headlines. The people in Toronto at the G6, used to be the G7. They pushed the Russian Federation out. DJ Trump would like to have them back in again. But he will be getting the publicity. In other words, the world's, as we used to say, TV cameras, or the cameras will be on DJ Trump and Field Marshal They will not be in Toronto. The summit will end. They will give a declaration of something, and that will be the end of that one, period. So when you make the headlines, and today in a global world, the headlines are indeed global. The kind of news that ordinary people throughout the world hear, either through social media, more than likely through their local press. It doesn't matter if you live in Nairobi, Kenya, or you are in Nashville, Tennessee. The headlines will blare out there. If you're in London, you'll get it from the BBC or the BBC World Service or whatever news outlets you tune into. And you have the world of a million people on what we term internet radio, what opportunists term podcasts. The podcasters will be busy, as we will be on BR on the World. We will cover the summit. So a busy weekend coming up, and at the same time we're covering via the open source report a Linux conference in Austin, Texas. It is a conference there of open source people and we will, of course, report on that particular event there. We submitted a proposal. Our proposal didn't make it, but that doesn't matter at this point. The people that are presenting are there. We will report their accomplishments, or at least what they had to say, as best as we can. It is the Texas Linux Fest, and we support these activities not only in Texas, but around the 50 continuous states and across the world when they occur. And that is on our open source report. That is our technical report. And this weekend we'll also be talking about the G6 on our Numbers Man presentation this week in economics. So we have a busy weekend ahead of us, and we had a busy week just reviewing a few things. The California primaries, we had the pleasure of covering it, an introduction to it, and the conclusion to it, and what its effect will be. On this particular program, we have the thoughts of Uncle Karl Rove and Newt Gingrich. We added him to the mix. He has, so we effectively have two right of center types around to get their take on what happened. The blue wave, Newt claims there's a red wave. Well, we'll see. And last night on Friday Java, we went into some of the polling and what is actually happening with the so-called generic ballot at this juncture in June. We have some updates out of the state of Minnesota. We reported that the progressive Congress type, Keith Ellison, is not running for re-election. He's running for the Attorney General in Minnesota. Thus, there's a special convention to be held by the Democrats to attempt to endorse a candidate for the race there. I think it's in the 5th district to replace Congressman Ellison. So a whole bunch of things going on. We'll look a little bit at the contest and how it is being presented. You have some people that have been around for a very long time. There is the first Muslim woman representative. She is running also, Ms. Omar, for the seat. Congressman Ellison was the first Muslim elected to Congress. So those are some of the things we look at. Does that have an impact on the wave? No, that has been traditionally a Democratic seat, I believe, since the 60s. Walter Judd had it. That's way back then. So let's get on with the lively presentation here. It is sort of lively. Just looking at the Washington Post. And Dennis Rodman pops up here. Dennis Rodman is a perfect segue. The Golden State Warriors won their third title in the last few years. Let's see if we can get to it. I thought we had it up here. Anyway, we'll just get it from the Post. But firstly, so now we effectively have the basketball season has been put to rest with the NHL. The Capitals, of course, were victorious over the team from Las Vegas, Nevada. But to Mr. Dennis Rodman, if you recall, excuse me, in 2013, he went to visit Field Marshal Kim. And at the time, it was a controversial trip. In fact, he had several trips there, called it basketball diplomacy. And he finally had to go and check into a treatment center to get the bad publicity off of his back. But now he is, as they say, being rehabilitated. He will be in Singapore. And he is one of few people on the planet to know both the participants, Field Marshal and DJ Trump. In fact, he said he gave a copy of DJ Trump's book to Field Marshal in 2017. So to quote him, I like Donald Trump. He's a good friend, and I've always asked him to talk to me because people of North Korea and the government over there asked me to talk to DJ Trump about what they want and how they could solve the problem. So this is an interesting article here. This is about various other so-called middle men negotiators over history, written by a professor here. We won't go into the whole article, but he speaks of as Eric Gananovich. He's an associate professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University's most recent book, America's Middlemen, Power at the Edge of the Empire. So in the book, he talks about various intermediaries that have ended up solving problems. Going back to the Barbary War, that was in 1801, the first overseas conflict brought on by the U.S. Tripoli had captured U.S. ships, imprisoned its sailors, and demanded a tribute. The U.S. chose to fight rather than to pay. The U.S. Navy's efforts didn't go well. The USS Philadelphia ran aground, and Tripoli captured its sailors before a brave action burned the ship. So some former slave here named Caphart, James Linder Caphart, helped solve the problem for the U.S. Caphart had been captain on a ship in 1785 and was held for 11 years in Tripoli, so he knew Tripoli very well indeed. So Caphart came up with the idea of forming an alliance with the brother of the Tripoli leader, then wrote to Secretary James Madison at the time, by that dethroning the President Bashaw and effecting a revolution in favor of the brother Hermit. Anyway, it worked out for him. Sent his designs of plan to his friend William Easton, who put it into effect without much authority from the U.S. Easton helped form an army, marched across North Africa, attacked Tripoli's second largest city, and ended up there. So thus he was victorious, and one of the examples he gives in this particular situation. So Dennis Rodman will be there, and no doubt where Dennis Rodman appears, the press appears, and DJ Trump all in one big escapade. What usually happens in these kinds of events in a world that random things do not occur is that they're carefully planned. And no doubt the people that are choreographing DJ Trump's trip favored the inclusion of Dennis Rodman. Why? Because that will bring more cameras there than what would normally come, because Dennis Rodman is bigger than life. He's one of few sporting types from his days with the Bad Boys in Detroit with the Pistons. So this is an appropriate segue from the basketball season. He is there. He was trying to get the Korean basketball team up to par. And he was then explaining to the world about Field Marshal who at that time had just been appointed, and the regime there. And of course, at that time, the sanctions were on the Democratic Republic of Korea. And the press blackballed Dennis Rodman. But Dennis Rodman is back, and now he is in the driver's seat. Let me just get this other story here so we can wind this up, and we'll go to Uncle Karl Rove. We'll get this score here. We got scores all over the place. The win, of course, the Warriors are completely swept the Cavaliers. It was disappointing to me. I felt that LeBron James would come through, but it just didn't happen there. The final score was 108-85. Third title in 4 years. Well, LeBron James talks about this. And with the addition there, Steph Curry's at 37 points. And of course, they had Mr. Duran there also. And LeBron James scored 23 points in the failed effort there. You have to credit the defense of the Golden State holding the Cavaliers to 85 points. Of course, this time of year, all the players are tired. There's no doubt about that. So that was an exit for the National Basketball Association from the lights and cameras. They will return in January. And of course, in the interim, we'll have plenty of other sports to look at. The NHL, will be there. And the NFL, they will be winding down in January with their Super Bowl. We don't know where that will end. The campaigner and human rights campaigner, Mr. Colin Kaepernick, is now working on a movie feature with a Hollywood producer type, Devani. Anyway, we'll have more on that as that agreement unfolds. And stay tuned there. DJ Trump is redefining that situation also. And to the pardons, well, he's promised to pardon a bunch of people. Jack Johnson, he pardoned some tax evader, I think it was, that ran a kosher meat packing plant in Iowa, a notorious character. And he also pardoned Ms. Johnson, who deserved to be pardoned. And he, according to DJ Trump, there are several thousand people that could be pardoned. They have their sentences commuted. And so why has DJ Trump decided he would be on a pardon bandwagon? The last two presidents, G.W. Bush and Barack Obama, pardoned a few people. And the pardon office, we got involved with those people on a case out of Chicago. Mr. Eberhard, it was in a disarray. There was a reactionary running that office. You would have never had this situation because they recommend the pardons to the president. But evidently in the Trump administration, we don't hear anything about them. DJ Trump has had his general staff bring in names from Jack Johnson on, and he does the pardon of the commentations himself. He's even offered to pardon the late, great Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali does not need a pardon. His case was vindicated at the Supreme Court. And he said he would not pardon O.J. Simpson. Well, we have news for him. O.J. Simpson was not under federal jurisdiction. The president's pardons are limited to people that are charged in the federal courts. So that's, again, there's a lot of disinformation out there. We thought we would throw that out. There is a little article here before we go to Uncle Carl. I saw it somewhere around here. Where is it? It's in the post on pardons, and I had not read this. Just scanned it. If we can't find it very quickly here, we'll have to catch it on another broadcast. Hey, where is it? Well, reported on Friday Java the passing of Red Shindies. He was player and manager for the St. Louis Cardinals. And while we try to find this, sort of just a number of things. The American people have not heard very many stories about pardons. Pardons tend to be something that's usually done around the holidays at the end of presidential terms. This is about the only time you will hear about a pardon. Here we go. This is by Brian Kiff, I think that's how you pronounce it. 5 myths about presidential pardons, he calls it. And Brian Ckallt. Anyway, the Frizzy is going to be here. Declared he can even pardon himself, which is true. A White House official told the Post Trump is now obsessed with pardons, his new favorite thing. Myth number 1, you must be charged or convicted before you can be pardoned. Not necessarily. Social media discuss about Trump's with hundreds of commentators that only convicted people of crime can be pardoned. You must go to trial and be convicted before you can be offered a pardon. Presidents are not. Most pardons are funneled to the president. We talked about that through the office of the pardon attorney, which considers the applications only from people who have already been served their sentences, but presidents can and do bypass the process. Ex parte Garland of the Supreme Court settled the question of preemptive pardons. The justices, that was in the 1866 case, decided that while pardons can be reached only on pass acts, the pardon may be executed any time after the act, the commission, either before a legal proceeding are taken or during the pendency or after the conviction or judgment. Even before Garland, Abraham Lincoln pardoned a dozen of people, including the alleged traitors, and most recently Jimmy Carter pardoned hundreds of Vietnam draft evaders there. So anyways. So, number 2, Nixon resigned only after Gerald Ford promised to pardon him. Simon Hirsch wrote in 1983, many of those involved in the transfer of power from Nixon to Ford still assumed that there was a deal of some kind after Ford's death. Other commentators expressed similar sentiments. We must conclude that the pardon was Nixon's idea, not Ford's idea. It's true that Nixon's chief of staff, Al Haig, if you remember him, asked Ford a week before the resignation to pardon Nixon. Ford was non-committal, fearing that Haig might have taken this as a tacit agreement. Ford called him in the presence of witnesses to say that he was not committed and he would not commit to pardon Nixon. 2 months later, in response to a House panel question about a possible quid pro quo, Ford recanted the timeline and recounted, and assured the panel that there never was at any time an agreement. There's no proof of it. 17 years later, Ted Kennedy presented Ford with a Profiling Courage Award for not cutting such a sleazy deal. President Barack Obama pardoned Chelsea Manning and Oscar Rivera after facing criticism for his pardon of Joe Arpaio, that is DJ Trump. And Mr. Lopez Rivera this is the Obama pardon you should get mad about. Well, Lopez Rivera was a freedom fighter, period. There were other commentations. There are commentations and not pardons. A pardon provides absolute at the end or preemptive any punishment for an act. Commutation merely negates the punishment. It leaves a criminal conviction in place but reduces the consequences. President Obama shortened Chelsea Manning's sentence from 30 to 7 and Lopez Rivera from 70 to 36 years. Both were freed and they still convicted of felons. So that is some of it there. And Bardick versus U.S., that was in 1915, where the pardon carries an imputation of guilt, acceptance of a confession. Over the years, many have come to see the necessary relation between a pardon and guilt. Ford carried the Burdick quote in his wallet, defending the Nixon pardon by noting that it established Nixon's guilt. Most recently, the MSNBC host, Ari Melber, he had admitted he was guilty when he accepted Trump's pardon. Burdick was a different issue, the ability to turn down a pardon. The language about inputting and confessing guilt was just an aside, and no doubt about that. Trump's rationale for pardoning the boxer Jack Johnson, the victim of a racially biased railroading in 1913. And Ford pardoned the infamous Tokyo Rose. Oh well. And George H.W. Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger. People don't remember old Caspar Weinberger. But incidentally, Trump's pardon of Jack Johnson was a post type of pardon, announced on Twitter that he has an absolute, anyway, this is, the law on self-pardon is clear, and again, this is, legal scholars confidently weighed in, Lawrence Tribe, he's common there, and Norman Eason wrote to the Post, the Constitution specifically bars a president from using the pardon power to prevent his impeachment or removal. Now, that doesn't mean that is impeachment or removal, but at the same time, he could pardon himself. Powers to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in, this is where O.J. Simpson come in, cases of impeachment, but the law is simply indeterminate here. There's an unusual legal question with a colorful argument on both sides. All we can say is that the president could try to pardon himself. Well, he could indeed. And as far as any criminal acts, such as obstruction of justice, he could indeed pardon himself from those. Now, his impeachment would result in his impeachment, but he'd say he would be a free man and could walk down Fifth Avenue chewing a bubble gum. Against self-pardon. In my opinion, the best reading of the Constitution suggests that a self-pardon would be invalid. First wrote self-pardon in the Yale Law Journal. That was in 1996, and has returned frequently to the subject. Now, these are myths here. By saying you think a judge should do it very differently from knowing what a judge will do, even if you think you've seen a unanimous Supreme Court decision in your crystal ball. Well, again, these are just myths here, and this Mr. Culty is a law professor and Howard Norris faculty scholar at the Michigan State University. So he is a law professor. For what good it was, will DJ Trump take that? No. Let's go to Uncle Carl Rove here. We wouldn't want to leave Uncle Carl out. He's somewhere. Oh. Here we go. Well, we'll get Newt and then we'll get back to Uncle Carl. The red wave is growing, according to Newt Gingrich. Where is he writing? Well, he was on Fox News. Over the past few days, 4 building blocks have fallen into place, which has strengthened the case for a red wave in 2018 midterm election. Thus, these building blocks are Republicans favoring political developments, what would normally be considered safe blue states. First of all, and this is one that's in Bob Mendez in New Jersey, a Democrat who has been deeply weakened by corruption charges, no doubt about that. The Senate Ethics Committee filed, let's see, what did they do to him? They admonished him in April here. The results is that on Tuesday, a relatively unknown Democrat who didn't raise enough money, $5,000 for a report, didn't raise that, came 37 percent garnered earned in the Democratic primary as a protest against Bob Menendez. Bob Huggin, the pharmaceutical executive, is a Republican nominee and will run a well-funded campaign against Bob Menendez. Well, running a well-funded campaign in a state that is not Trump-friendly doesn't mean anything. But we'll see. If the Democrats will lose the seat, they will lose New Jersey. There is no possible way they could control the Senate. Secondly, the California primary puts Republican John Cox in the general election with Lieutenant Governor there, Gavin Newsom, former mayor, of San Francisco. GOP candidate on the ballot has been estimated at 23 points, but that was just on the ballot there. And in Minnesota, we'll talk a little more about Minnesota. Went crazy last Saturday, according to Newt. The state convention was taken over by hard left forces. There are Minnesota activists to the left, already a liberal state. The result was the reputed attorney general decided to run for governor. That created a vacuum that Keith Ellison appeared in. The combination of personalities driven, and we've talked a little about that, bitterness and ideological extremism have suddenly made Minnesota Democrats vulnerable. A longtime Minnesota analyst, Barry Castleman, has written, and already that former Governor Tim Pawlenty is likely to be the next governor, that the 2 Democratic House seats are likely to go Republican next fall. The fall more likely. If the chaos continues, that chaos will be, some of it will be corrected, and even the Senator Tina Smith, who was appointed to replace Al Franken, could suddenly be in trouble, and the chaos will help, of course, the Republican. Well, chaos always helps the other party. And that's the whole situation. We commented on Al Franken being forced out of office. We didn't know the effects that Tina Smith would have. She has been lieutenant governor. She used to head Planned Parenthood. But that in itself in a very dirty campaign. But the one wild card there in Minnesota, is in many other places, the 50-pound, 500-pound gorilla, DJ Trump. DJ will have concluded his foray into Singapore, and depending on where his tariff campaign settles, that, of course, is hurting Minnesota farmers. And depending on which of these candidates in the gubernatorial race, there are several that make it into the November slot. Now, the former attorney general there, Swanson, would be a very strong candidate. They have Tim Walz there. They have a progressive named Murphy, but she's out of the Twin Cities area. A little bit difficult. It's always been difficult for a governor to come out of the Twin Cities, the urban areas of Minnesota. But Walz comes out of southern Minnesota, and Swanson, being the Attorney General, progressive Attorney General, even got the National Rifle Association endorsement. Very different kind of candidate there. As to the Attorney General's office, well, we'll see on that. The Democrats have an endorsed candidate there, and then they have Keith Ellison. And there's a slew of others there also. Let me finish him up there. Americans are beginning to conclude that their lives are getting better, and that Trump and the Republicans' leadership is a part of the phenomenon. It's interesting. Old Newt Gingrich calls it a phenomenon. Well, that will depend on a lot of things. We just advised people. We talked about the generic ballot between now and November. Different situation entirely. And we just get this story before we do find Uncle Carl. The D.C. panel, this is from The Hill, adopts rules requiring candidates to run and serve as Democrats. There has been a lot of trouble. This is on the 8th of June. The Democratic National Committee adopted a new rule on Friday aimed at keeping outside candidates like Bernie Sanders from trying to clinch the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. The new rule, adopted by the Bylaws Committee, requires all Democratic presidential candidates to be a member of the Democratic Party. Sanders, who maintained his status as independent, fought for a tough primary. Of course, he was robbed by Hillary Clinton, and they see where that is going. Now, Randy Weingarten, she's president of the American Federation of Teachers, and a member they opposed on Twitter the route change in Providence, Rhode Island, has changed the rule to ensure to run for president, Democrat, you need to be a Democrat. Well, again, this is back to a long history of the Democratic National Committee shutting out candidates. Now, it all goes down to a basic point, and this was a point in 2016. If you malign a section of your party, mistreat them in the primaries, rob them, as they did with Bernie Sanders, you can't come around in November and expect them to vote for you. They will either vote, as many did, like myself, for Jill Stein, or stay home, or whatever. Some even voted for DJ Trump, but voted for Bernie Sanders. So that's the dilemma that they face, and the consequences are adding up there. Keith Ellison, who is vice chair of the Democratic Party, a ceremonial position, he ran for chair. In our opinion, that was not a very wise move. He just simply could not make it. But now he has exited Washington. There was an article in Mother Jones saying he is now back to his roots. No doubt about that. Whether or not he can win the election in Minnesota is up in hands. But Keith Ellison does have a political future. Thought we'd bring that up. Now also they're in reducing the superdelegates, the one that got actually did in Keith Ellison. But that is only one of many things happening here. And let me see. Here's Uncle Carl. We couldn't forget him. Will a blue wave break in California? This is on the 7th of June. Tuesday's primaries in 8 states produced more than a few interesting nuggets, as he called them, in the era of Me Too. In South Dakota, they have Christy Noem as a candidate for governor. In New Mexico, Democrats picked Michelle Grisham as their candidate. Another twist in the Alabama 2nd District, that's Martha Roby, failed to get 50% of the vote. She is now competing in a runoff against this Bobby Bright. He's an ex-Democrat there, and now he pledges allegiance to DJ Trump. The Alabama race is so tight in 2016, Roby dropped her support for DJ Trump's presidential candidacy after the Access Hollywood tape was released. Disgruntled Trumpers must now decide if they prefer Mr. Bright, who backed Barack Obama in 2008, voted for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker in 2009, became a Republican only in February. I didn't know that. Well, that'd be interesting. The takeaways, the biggest takeaway came from California, where the fiercely contested primaries showed this year that midterms are likely to be unlikely to be a blue wave indeed in 2018. The brutal district by district battle, each outcome would be determined as much by the quality of candidates and their campaigns as by the national climate. Well, that's a big debate there. Republicans hold 14 districts in California, more seats than an entire delegation of 41 states. Democrats are targeting 7 that Hillary Clinton carried. The Republican primary voters total exceeded the Democratic total in 6 of those 7 districts. The California contest, the jungle primary, Louisiana has one incidentally also. Democrats are listed on the same ballot, and the top 2 vote getters, regardless of the party, same thing in Louisiana, face off. The general election results show that Golden State Republicans are as enthusiastic as Democrats to turn out. Jeff Denham, that's in the 10th, that's in the Central Valley. 51% voted for the Republican candidate, while 49.9% picked the Democrats, giving the Republicans a 4.2 advantage. In another Central Valley, that's a conservative area there. David Valacado received a 63.9%, while the Democrat opponent only won 36.1%. Well, that's a wash. In the 25th district, incumbent Steve Knight received 52.8%, while the Democratic challengers got a combined 47.2%, giving the Republicans a 5.6 edge in a race for an open seat in Orange County, led by former Assemblyman and rising star Young Kim. Received a combination of 54.1, while the Democrats took 44.2, giving the Republicans a 9.9 advantage. Despite a $1.5 million the Democrats spent to slow Kim's momentum down. Now, that is in Orange County. Orange County used to be the center of support for one Ronald Wilson Reagan. Orange County GOP incumbent Minnie Waters took, and that's a seat. Minnie Waters has been around for a while. 53.2 to the Democrats combined, 44.4 for an 8.8 advantage. But in the 4th district, the Republicans failed to realize their hope of an all-Republican general election, though they did win 52.6 to 46.5% of their. Dana Rockenbacher now is vulnerable, having an eccentric reputation for, among other things, praising Vladimir Putin. Well, anyway, that's not a big deal there. DJ Trump has done that. One district held by the GOP where Democrats outvoted Republicans, the 49th. That's old Darrell Issa's district. They almost defeated Darrell Issa the last time around. Democrats at a 50.6, 2.3 advantage there. Rockenbacher is the most at-risk Republican. Well, yeah, that's one of those situations that we sometimes find ourselves in. Let me just quickly go over the latest shenanigans in this Democratic race for Keith Ellison's seat. There's a number of them there. The party announced a special committee that will be on the June 17th. They'll have that, and that's for Keith Ellison's seat. The governor there, Mark Dayton, endorsed the first term state representative Omar of Minneapolis, saying in a statement that she's shown tremendous leadership at the state capitol and will champion progressive values in the Congress. She's only been there for one term. Ellison among the most progressive in the U.S. Senate, no doubt about that. A crowded field. Omar might have an edge in national exposure, appearing on The Daily Show, the cover of Time magazine, and a music video. But there are other people running also. An African-American named Bobby Joe Champion. Yeah, what a hell of a name. And Patricia Torres Ray, another Latino, obviously. And who else do we have here? Kelleher, former Democratic, I think, Speaker of the House there. And ran against Governor Dayton and lost. So all these candidates here, Torres Ray, etc., are talking about their experience. One of the big problems, this is a very short count situation. It'd be very, very hard for a candidate that doesn't have name recognition or is widely promoted to win there. So he's pointed out here, the last Republican in the district was Walter Judd. It was 1963. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the president. So thus a tight race coming up, no doubt about that, in that district. Hard to say how it sorts out, because these candidates are going into a primary regardless of the endorsement. The DFL, that's the Democratic Farm Labor Party, their endorsement would help any candidate to, in terms of money support across that 4th district there. And Omar being a Somali, large grouping of Somalis in the Twin Cities, would be a base to work on there. Kelleher, I think that's the name there, would traditionally attract the Emily's List types, and they have a strong presence also. And then you have these other candidates, so it's kind of scattered up there as to how that particular race would go. Who knows right now? It's a crapshoot, but more than likely the DFL candidate, whoever survives into November, will take Mr. Ellison's seat. Now let's do the sports. We can finally get to Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball, incidentally, again, that score was 108 for the Warriors, and the game was played in Cleveland, 85 for the Cavaliers, and it was the end of the whole situation there. Major League Baseball has 100 games to go, and we tuned into a few of these games. The Cubbies won in Wrigley Field 3-1 over the Pirates. The Giants were in Washington Giants at 9-5. The Brewers were in Philadelphia, and the Brewers 12-4 over the Phillies. The Phillies haven't been winning very many games. The Orioles and Blue Jays in Toronto. It was Blue Jays 5-1. The White Sox and Red Sox. You don't see that very much. The White Sox actually won in Fenway Park, 1-0. Cleveland and the Tigers in the Motor City. Cleveland on top 4-1. And in 10, the Cardinals in Cincy, 7-6 over the Reds. The Yankees and Mets, crosstown rivalry there. Yankees came out on top 4-1. Mr. Chapman got the save. Mr. Green got the win. You don't see the Yankees playing the Mets very much, but the Mets don't have the best team this year. The Padres and Marlins in Florida, a long ways from San Diego. Marlins 4-0. They shut out the Padres. The Mariners and Rays. Mariners were also in Florida. Mariners 4-3. Mariners have been winning some games lately. And the Astros of Houston and the Rangers of Dallas or Arlington. Anyway, 7-3. That's G.W. Bush's old team, Astros. The Angels and Twins in Minnesota. 4-2 Angels. The D-backs and Rockies, two teams that we don't know where they're going. The D-backs 9-4. The Royals and Athletics in Oakland. It was all Oakland 7-2. And finally, the Atlanta team was in Los Angeles, and they were not greeted warmly by the Dodgers. Final score 7-3. We tuned into that particular one, and let's see who finally ended up winning that one. McCarthy took the loss. Warner Buehler took the win. The Dodgers have so many of their starting pitchers on the disabled list that they're going to have to go to the minor league just to get their starters. The bullpen is okay, but the starters, there's trouble. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback, and we'll have the financial program Numbers Man this weekend also. And we can look at the polling very quickly here. Trying to run too far over. Okay. But I guess sometimes we do. We also, my workstation is playing around with me. Okay. Well, I suppose it's worth going here. We have a Fox News poll here. This is on Friday. I think we gave this. At 46 for DJ Trump. At 47 in the outliner Rasmussen. And generic ballot, according to Fox News, the Democrats are up by 9. The Georgia governor's race, Cagle is up by 7. That's Rosette Stone. Mm-hmm. And on Thursday, he had the NBC Wall Street Journal, 44, the approval rate there. And they had generic ballot up by 10. And the wrong track, right track, wrong track by 19. So that's basically where the Real Clear Channel people stand. So we'll have an open source report. We'll talk more about the Microsoft acquisition of GitHub and where developers place their code to share along, and we'll look at that particular situation. And we'll also be covering the summit in Singapore between DJ Trump, the U.S. President, and Field Marshal His Excellency of the Democratic Republic of Korea. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday morning quarterback. Good day.